This is Rudowski here with the one and only Adam Kokesh, who was just in jail a couple days ago facing felony charges and the possibility of 20 years in jail. An activist who was with him still has to go to court, but Adam, what is the secret Adam Kokesh recipe to get away with a felony charge?
Well, part of it was having so many wonderful people on the outside who were ready to respond when that happened, and I got to give props especially to George Donnelly of Shield Mutual. I actually bought arrest insurance, and I was kind of overdue if you think about it. I've been arrested for activism somewhere between 1 and 2 dozen times, and you know, in a sense, this was really a big deal because I've never been charged with a felony for activism. I've been threatened with them before, but never actually like charged and you know, arraigned and had a complaint go forward for a felony. But I played hardball and I said I wasn't going to cooperate, and I resisted every step of the way. And I think I was making the guards depressed, being as cheery as I was and showing them how much freer I was in jail than they were enforcing the laws and the policies of the prison. And if it wasn't for the people on the outside, you know, Meg McClain, Nathan Cox, Jim Babb, you know, so many others who made phone calls, who donated to the Legal Defense Fund right away, it wouldn't have been possible for me to have the leverage that I had in prison to make it more costly for them to hold me. And this gets to the bigger question, because really in order to answer that, you have to ask, why was I arrested? And that's still you know, a question that's open to debate. But as it was, I went before the judge on Thursday for a detention hearing, and I refused bail on the grounds that the conditions were unacceptable. And you know, I was basically at the time volunteering to do 100-day solitary confinement because I was refusing to take a.
You told them you wanted 100-day.
Well, not exactly, but I knew that I was volunteering for up to 100 days, for 30 days indictment plus 70 days for speedy trial. And at that point, they're like, "What do we do with this guy?" And I think the judge realized that the case was a horrible setup. I mean, and this is where you have to get to asking the question about why, and if they were going to set me up, why would they do such a terrible job? Like, I'm almost offended that they sent, you know, their little park rangers, you know, and these bozos to after me. Like that's all I'm worth, you know. I don't rate some like CIA suits with the earpieces and shit, you know. No, I'm just some schmuck activist getting harassed, and I think that gets more in line with what really happened, and you know, rather than there being some higher level nefarious plot. And so being able to play hardball was what resulted in them saying, well, we can't get away with what we're doing because we just look like idiots. So let's try to save face and send them out with some citations. And when they were processing me out, it was the guy who wrote the complaint, Donald Reed, the officer with the Parks Department, who was on the stand on Thursday.
Is that the same guy you filmed in a separate YouTube video?
No, the officer that tried to tackle me, though, was one that I had shown at one of the prior smoke downs. So yeah, just like with the Jefferson Dance Party, as you know, there was a retaliation element to this, you know, with that officer being one that I'd embarrassed prior as well. And he put my personal effects on the table. So you're going to sign for these and you're going to sign these tickets. I just laughed at him. I'm like, what are you? No, I'm not. Send me back. I dare you. You know, I had already gone through all the out processing, and they were just like, all right, this is the last step before we let you go. And I just laughed, and I took the citations, but I didn't sign them, and so they're not valid. And they dumped me in the rain on the sidewalk there, and I had to, you know, hoof it over to the Apple store in Philly and get my phone plugged in, and that was Friday afternoon. So I just did 6 days, and it was easy time.
But that's still an amazing story, because N.A. Poe did comply, and he still has to be facing bail conditions. He still has to go back and do, you know, the regular court thing, and he's still facing those charges. But when you were in jail for this,
in a way, it makes me wish I resisted more, because it shows in contrast our two strategies. He said, "Okay, dude, I'm going to do whatever it takes to get," you know, he threatened a hunger strike, and that, I think that helped me get a phone call at least. But you know, he was like, "I'm getting out of here. I am not going to do this time. You know, you can sit here, Adam, but like I'm out of here." And I said, "Well, okay, I don't mind. I'm going to fight it. I'm going to take that harder line." And I only had to do like 12 more hours, 16 more hours in prison. It was solitary at that point, but like, you know, it wasn't that big a deal. And it makes me think that the more people resist, the better it's going to be for them, and rather than giving in or aiding with your kidnapping or assault or whatever it is. And you know, I think for Smoke Down Prohibition joint summit with President Choom that we now have coming up in front of the White House on June 8th. If I get arrested there, it's going to be limp and mute from the beginning.
That's what that was my next question. Is like, you're sitting in jail, you're in solitary confinement. What makes you call for another event that you were just arrested for? And what made you do that? And aren't you afraid that you're going to be arrested again for this?
I'm not really afraid of anything anymore, and this experience kind of got me back in touch with this, because it was like, oh crap, I'm in a federal prison now, and I was set up and framed by federal agents who were cooperating with other federal agencies who had enough intel on me, as we learned in court Thursday, that they could recognize me from my face without a photograph. And you're like, what, you know? Yeah. So what am I going to do? Hey, I'm in prison. Can I get a message out? Yeah, so we came up with a 1-minute script to announce this next marijuana civil disobedience event, and I read it to my dad over the phone and said, get this to my team, they're going to make a video and we're going to make it happen. And I thought, well, you know, why not make it really costly for them to keep me in prison? Why not take advantage of the platform that they're giving me? But one more thing I want to say is an important lesson for this that I think your audience would really appreciate is that a lot of people, when they wake up to the nature of government, go, oh my God, they're trying to invade my privacy, therefore I'm going to be as private as possible. And that's when you're vulnerable. Yeah. The more visible you are, the safer you are. What I was able to pull off was possible because of whatever visibility I have. And I think what I really want for the activist community is for everybody to have that. I want everybody to have that connectedness and visibility. And there's some activists who are like, no, I'm going to be off the radar. And it's like, you're putting yourself in a danger.
And you're denying yourself to who you really are. You should never be afraid to speak what's on your mind. And once you do that, you start denying yourself. I mean, look at the case of Brandon Robb. You know, nobody knew about it until people on his Facebook page started asking questions. And that's when the story blew up.
Well, in his case, his family was really well prepared for this, because they had been going through that together. And that's the important thing too. When you wake up, bring people with you, because it's in your own best interest. Don't be the one guy in your sector, you know, of society going, oh crap, I know what's going on. Nobody, you know, everybody else is totally full, you know, totally asleep. Bring people with you, wake them up, create a community for yourself that provides you that protection.
And never be afraid to be who you really are, which is the most important lesson. When you were in jail, I know I've been in jail a couple times, and you meet a lot of interesting characters. I really wanted to know, who was the worst person you met and who was the best person you met in jail?
Well, let me say, just in general, the prisoners are, you know, getting 3 good meals a day, plenty of time to sleep and relax and work out. And some of them are resigned, but most of them are, you know, upbeat and, you know, have a positive attitude, and they're very healthy. And by contrast, the guards are fat and miserable, and they sit around drinking soda pop all day and getting fat. And it's just like, this was really fun for me when I was in prison, to show that contrast and to keep a really positive attitude. But I actually was threatened by one of the marshals. And apparently he had read some of the more ridiculous attack articles that are out there about me now, and thought he had the scoop on me, and I just pulled him apart. And I said, you know, I'm sorry you've got such a small penis, you got to talk shit to a guy in handcuffs. And he just was like, started sputtering and going off, and oh, the handcuffs are coming off, I'm going to kick your ass. And I just walked past him when the door opened, and I went into the, you know, out of his custody, and just said, enjoy your insecurities. And so there were a bunch of other prisoners that went down in front of, so he was pretty well embarrassed. I feel like I got a good exchange in there. But, you know, I met some cool people. You know, I made some dangerous friends, but you see that there are a lot of people in there, and, you know, it's hard to say, well, I'm going to take the word of a convict or someone behind bars. But well, Gosnell, the abortion doctor, was actually just down the hallway from us, a few cells. But you know, we met people that were in there for gun charges, and it was like for possession, and then possession of, you know, as someone who'd been guilty of illegal possession before, and then you're a felony with a firearm, and it was a lot of stuff like that. And it's, you know, you look at the ethnic breakdown of the prison population, and it's just right there in your face. This is a bullshit racist drug war, and the system is designed to keep people down.
All right, my next question is, are you calling for an armed American revolution?
Well, we're already in the middle of an armed American revolution. I mean, let's be honest about it. And people, when I proposed the armed, loaded, open carry march on Washington, D.C., oh, that's, you're escalating inappropriately, you're being aggressive. Well, even if we were, it's already a violent revolution. When you see that there are victims of government every day who are subject to the violence of federal agents, of state agents, of police officers, you're 8 times more likely to be killed by a cop than by a terrorist. And you want to tell me like we're not already in a violent revolution? As we see people realizing that the government as a whole is a scam, I think now it's a very appropriate time to simply give form to that as a secessionist movement, as a movement to dissolve the federal government entirely in an orderly, peaceful manner, because if we don't, we're going to be doing it the hard way. If anything, what we are proposing now with not doing the march on DC, but doing a march on 50 state capitals of people specifically calling for governors to secede and reclaim federal property.
So you changed that. You're not going to be marching across the bridge. You're just going to be marching from Virginia to your capital.
Right. Well, for everybody in their state capitals, we're because it was too focused on not just me, but that one action, and I don't want to, I'm not afraid of people saying, oh, Adam, you're going for the spotlight, you're an egomaniac, because everybody gets that when they start making noise and people start disagreeing with them. But it really was too dependent on that single action and on me as an individual organizer to ensure that it was done properly and according to plan and in a relatively safe manner. And if the government was going to escalate against me and kidnap me for a week, I had to say, well, I can't take on that role. That role can't exist in this revolution anymore. I think that's really important, that we take this and we make it more open source.
Yeah, I definitely don't think it should be based on the individual, because then you could just easily take down the message. And sadly, a lot of people do want the leaders, do need the leaders, but I think as a movement as a whole, if we move away from that and each independently act ourselves, I think that's a lot smarter way to proceed. And were there any other factors that made you change the march from Virginia to DC, from now just to Virginia to the Capitol?
Well, no, it's not just to the Capitol, it's to all 50 state capitals in the country. And we have, part of it was that it was already happening that way. And there were individuals all across the country who were saying, we can't make it to DC that day because Independence Day is a Thursday, but we want to do something meaningful with that day. And they were doing events in their home states already. And so we just wanted to make that the focus rather than have the focus be on this specific thing. And also making it about firearms was kind of a linchpin point. It wasn't exactly the central focus, because it really isn't about guns. Guns are just a reflection of how much the government respects your right as an individual to apply deadly force, which is something that it's kind of hard to deny anyways. They can fight it and then fight the mechanisms of it and try to make guns illegal, but that wasn't really what it was about. It was really about changing that relationship with government. And if anything, we have escalated our tactics by making it absolutely clear this is a call for secession. This is a call to end the Fed. And when we say that, we mean end the federal government. And a lot of people will go, oh my God, that's radical. But when we proposed this, and we talked about this as an armed revolt to overthrow the United States government, no one disputed that at all. And it was really interesting to point this out, because all of the criticisms of the March on DC, the armed march on DC, they weren't, oh, well, the federal government's a good idea, or Obama's not that bad, or taxes aren't that high. It was, Adam's a scumbag and he doesn't know tactics. And it was like, okay, so you guys are ready to overthrow the government with us then. We just need to give it a different form, and then you'll get on board. So, if there are people who were in that position or saw that kind of stuff, and a lot of it was based on really bad misrepresentations, like deliberate misrepresentations of what we were doing, like, oh, Adam's gonna go start shooting police. That could get him arrested. And it was like, oh, geez. But, like I said, being able to step back personally from this and make it a lot more open source, I think gives it a lot more strength. But what we're seeing is, in a way, I felt also kind of like a sleazebag politician. The old saying, if you see a riot, jump in front of it and call it a parade. Yeah. And in a sense, like, that's what's already happening. And as Americans, we need to come to grips with the fact that this is an empire in decline. Yeah. And if we don't do something drastic to put the federal government in check, we're going to be doing things the hard way later with a drastic, potentially violent collapse. And the thing with this marijuana protest on June 8th, I think we are at a tipping point there where immediately we can take out a linchpin for the war on drugs, because Obama can just like that say it's not Schedule 1 anymore, and it has recognized that it has medical value, and then the federal incentive tied to marijuana is gone. And I think it's worth pushing for some things like that, but voting isn't going to be the answer. Changing the paradigm is going going to be the answer. And right now we're at a tipping point there where Obama's hypocrisy is so blatant. It's important to call it out. But I don't want to fight individual laws. I don't want to, I don't want to do that anymore. And I think that's largely futile. You fight back an inch, and the government says, "Good job, you lobbied and you fought and you won and you voted and way to go. The democratic process is working and the government represents you." Meanwhile, behind your back, they just took another mile, and you're like, "Whoa, what's going on?" Government keeps growing.
I definitely think it's really interesting to see a proactive approach, because I see a lot of people reacting to the problems that are coming from the government. But I see you as kind of stepping it up and saying, no, we're going to make them react. And it is an interesting paradigm. But what are your hopes? What do you hope to accomplish with this rally on July 4th?
The abolition of the United States federal government.
Do you think it's possible?
I think this is a good start. I think it's inevitable. I think it's an orderly, peaceful disillusionment is not inevitable. The ending of the federal government as we know it is inevitable. But like I said, it's up to the American people. Are we going to do things the easy way, or are we going to do things the hard way?
Are you comfortable saying it's an armed American revolution?
Absolutely.
Can it be peaceful if it's armed?
Absolutely. And this goes to the important point, and this was one of the things that I really thought was cool about the open carry march, is it was making, you had to either accept the point that carrying a rifle, being armed, is not an act of aggression, is not an act of violence. Being healthy and physically capable, having hands that could strangle someone does not make you a killer. Having a gun across your back does not make you a violent person. It means that you're someone who's capable of applying that specific deadly force for whatever purpose you want. But having that ability is different, and making that philosophical point that is so conflated in the gun control debate was important. But, it really is secondary to the larger issue of, is this government sustainable? And I think most people at this point, like I said, when they were opposing the open carry march, no one was criticizing that. No one was debating that. And I think, if anything, we made a huge accomplishment in that, just by changing the premises of the conversation. And right now, as we start promoting this, the new actions for Independence Day, and people in all 50 states, and we've got tons of signups already. If people want to get involved, we have a national coordinator, Jeffrey Phillips, Jeffrey, Jeffrey, at AdamVersusTheMan.com, and he's moderating all the various 50 plus, because we have some territories being represented as well already, 50 plus states or actions that are going to be happening on Independence Day. And we just want people to get involved and take this as an opportunity to start spreading this message, and as a way to engage. And it's a really simple thing to say, hey guys, do you really think you're better off with the federal government than you would be without it? And I think at this point, you'd be really hard-pressed to make the case that this is doing us well.
Now, you've been getting a lot of praise, but also you've been getting a lot of criticism. And one of the criticisms I read about is people who are saying you're pushing the envelope too far, that instead of calling for an armed American revolution, we should have a peaceful, information, intellectual-based evolution. What do you say to those people?
I think that's what's happening in the longer view of human history. And the way you phrase that right away conflated the terms armed and peaceful again, implied that armed was not peaceful. But being armed and able to defend yourself isn't unpeaceful until you decide that you are going to violently defend yourself. And we have well past the point where that's justified, where the government has clearly made itself a violent aggressor, by anybody's standards, against numerous individuals within the United States. So we're clearly justified already in coming to that point. But where we are at this exact point in human history, and in American history, in the momentum of statism, and in the momentum of the course of this paradigm of, well, we need governments to organize society, and we're not capable of ruling ourselves. As that comes to an end, there are going to be some major upheavals. There are going to be some radical changes that are going to happen, very rapidly. And we don't get to determine the destiny of humanity, but we do get to shape the course of it. And I think in that sense, what we are doing here with this, calling for an orderly dissolution of the federal government, is the peaceful, nonviolent, smooth way of doing that, rather than the violent, dangerous way of staying in denial and allowing it to continue on its current course.
You mean demonstrating, show of force, people arming themselves, not calling for any violence, but standing there peacefully calling for the end of the federal government. Is it possible?
It's inevitable.
All right, you just got out of jail. Where are we going? Well, where do you want to go? What's your first destination as a free man?
First destination, go home, pack up some.
With the story still developing about how the Justice Department was spying on Associated Press journalists, I wanted to know, is there a way for a journalist to keep his sources secure? Is there a way to keep our information away from the grubby hands of the government? To find